We believe in an eternal Torah. Torah basically is usually translated, if it ever is translated, as law, at least into English, or the law. But it's less about laws. Laws would perhaps be mishpatim or chukim, depending on the exact definition, what makes something a chok and what makes something a mishpat. The Torah is actually from the shoresh yud resh hey. And as a noun, normally shorashim are used to create verbs. In this case, the Torah is therefore the instruction or a set of instructions, how someone is to be taught something. Uh, and we believe that this eternal set of instructions is immutable. And they were given to both mankind and the Jewish people specifically. That is, B'nai Noach, humanity, are bidden to keep the Torah as we know it. It's for their own good, and we are bidden to keep the Torah also. Except our Torah has a lot more specific commandments that bind us. And now, sometimes we encounter, I guess, this tendency, which is certainly not unique to our generation, that perhaps certain laws of the Torah are outdated, don't fit us. Perhaps we should not be subscribing to them anymore. Okay, I can't convince people otherwise. I myself am. I try to be observant, and I try to be loyal to the Torah. But I can only tell you what the sages told us about certain immutable laws, just like the last few weeks. So this is, I decided to talk about this because this has been coming up in various discussions, certainly private questions individuals ask me about these things. So it's good to know what let's say, the sages had to say about it. Okay, people are still coming in. So the first issue we're going to talk about is the Surah of Serus. That means the prohibition to sterilize living animals. We're going to read Maimonides' definition. He has a Sefer Mitzvot. So this would be the negative commandment number 361. That's toward the end there. It's taken from the book of Leviticus, right when it talks about blemished animals and how you shouldn't cause blemishes within animals and also within people. Here's how it goes. Ha'azarashus harnu milashchit et evrei hatashmish shel zacharim mikol min shel be'alei ha'chayim v'chein shel ha'adam. This, by the way, is not Maimonides' exact words. He wrote this in Arabic. We're using Rav Kapach's translation. He says this is the warning not to. Usually Azara is a thou shalt not in English. To destroy the organs of generation in males of any species of animal. Baalei Chaim is anything that's alive, and also of Adam. Sometimes Baalei Chaim is a living animal to the exclusion of people. And notice it specifically says Zacharim. He said it, so he should be praised. Said this. Achar sheizkir ma'uch v'chatut v'datuk v'charut. Okay. This is a group of deformities that could be caused within an animal as a korban. It says that one should not bring as a sacrifice to God an animal that has, let's say, has its testicles crushed or cut off or disconnected, etc. All these terrible things that make us quite uncomfortable. But people who work in animal husbandry are actually quite familiar with this, and sometimes it's been within the interest of farmers to castrate or sterilize certain animals for certain purposes. And then it adds, after the fact, that one should not bring such animals as sacrifice because they've been blemished. It says, Uvartzachem lo tasu, in your land, don't do this. That's a direct quote from the Bible right there. And the Perush is, that the explanation is, Uvachem lo tasu, you shouldn't do it to yourselves. Velver al lavzeh, someone who violates this commandment, is to be lashed. That's what it says here. Lokek, lomar, hamisares mishahu, someone who castrates another. So notice he says mishu over here. Uv'eza min sheyeh, doesn't matter what species we're talking about, whether human or otherwise any other type of animal. Uferek shmoneh shvatzim, amaru, shmonah shvatzim, sorry. This is a chapter, I think it's like the 13th chapter of Shabbat, that begins with describing certain properties of the 8 shvatzim. Shvatzim are creepy, crawling types of animals, basically certain rodents and reptiles in the Torah that are more contaminated than other animals. That is, when they die, they transmit impurity. For example, rats, mice, those are basically the rodents on the list, various types of lizards. And it says here, there's a braita that's brought there, Tanya, Minayin l'serus badam shu asur. How do you know that it's forbidden to castrate a person? Tamlu mamar uvartzachem l'tasu. That's why the pasuk teaches us, don't do it within your lands. Wa filu misareset achar misares. Let's say he does an act of destruction of the genitalia after one has already done so. I don't know, for whatever reason. Let's say some terrible damage has been done, and then the person goes and does some more. He's still chayav. He's still considered liable for such a thing. Damar Rabbi Chia bar Abun Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hakol Modim the Mehametz Har Mehametz Shu Hayav. Everyone would agree that with regards to the prohibition on Passover to leaven a grain product, which is this would mean to leaven something, let's say cause a dough to rise. You add the sourdough to a dough or allow it to rise or add some other ingredient that causes it to rise faster. Let's say someone does that again. This dough, instead of being baked quickly and being turned into masa, unleavened grain product to be eaten on Passover, he's now caused it to rise, and then someone else goes in and puts in more leavening agent. So that second person is also obligated, even though he leavened that which is already leavened. Shneimar lo te'afeh chametz. It says regarding the sacrifice. Specifically it says lo te'afeh chametz. It's talking about leavening the meal offerings in the temple. Meal offerings in the temple can also all year round. They're not supposed to be chametz. So a person should not leaven those meal offerings. And here it's talking about a person who leavened a meal offering after it had already been leavened. So it's a double isur. You would have said that the person who leavened the meal offering the second time around should not be liable. Kamash Milan then comes and teaches us that no, he's still liable. And it says velo te'aseh chametz. It says it should not be baked and leavened, and it should not be made leavened. So too, b'msareis achar misareis chayav, with regarding one who castrates after has something that's already technically been castrated, is still liable. Shenemar uma'uch v'chatut. It mentions all these different deformities, crushed and disconnected and cut off. Im al karut chayav. If he's obligated for saying it's already been cut off, on la tuklo kol shekin, of course saying it's been disconnected or dislodged, of course he should be prohibited. Rather, elalavin nutak notek acharei koreit. It's to teach us that the person who has done this act of nituk, disconnecting even after something's been cut off, he is liable. Now, I know something's a little bit uncomfortable to learn about these halachot, unfortunately, but we have to see that this is a strict isur. There is technically no prohibition for Gentiles to do such a thing, although it is, I think it would be wrong to do so to people. But technically speaking, they could do it to their animals, but we don't encourage them. There's some Talmudic discussion about, for example, even though you and I are familiar with the 7 prohibitions that bind all mankind, the 6 prohibitions plus the 1 positive commandment, the Sheva Mitzvot, you then find in that discussion in Sanhedrin and Maimonides bring this, oh yeah, by the way, the Gentiles aren't supposed to keep the Sabbath and they're not supposed to study Torah. So shouldn't there be 9 commandments? And the answer could be that no, those are later rabbinic enactments because you need a Jewish people to observe the Sabbath and to be studying the Torah before, let's say, Noahides, who precede the Jewish people by quite a few centuries, could enjoy such prohibition. But in those sugyot, hold on one second. In those sugyot, we find that there's other suggestions. What else can't the Gentiles do? When I say Gentiles, I mean the rest of humanity, not the Jews. What else can't they do? There's a few havaminas there that, for example, they should not be mixed breeding species, even though technically speaking we don't hold that way. There was a stream of thought within classical Judaism that said just like Jews should not be mixing species, whether of flora or fauna, so too Gentiles should not be doing that. These are halachot over here. This section is taken from the Rambam's code. This is from Sefer HaMitzvot, and this is, I think, from Isurei Biyah, if I'm not mistaken. I might have made a mistake here, but this is the 16th chapter. He brings this in a different formulation. These are his own words over here. We've seen this also. Asur lahafsid evrei hazera. In this case, Rav Kapach, perhaps Maimonides wrote in Arabic over here, this word tashmish, every tashmish, he meant every hazera. This was a translation. This is what Maimonides actually wrote: the organs of generation, whether within man or domesticated animal or wild animal or in bird. You can't do that. And it doesn't matter if the animals are technically kosher species or not, also. And even though it said, Uv artzachem lo ta'asu, the sages tell us that this prohibition applies whether in the land of Israel or abroad, b'chutz la'aretz, even though it says Uv artzachem. We learn this from a tradition. It says, Mipiash mu'alamdu shedavar ze noheg b'chol makom. And the point of this verse is, Kolomar lo yaseh zot b'Yisrael. This should not be done among the Jews. Ben gufo, ben gufot achirim. Whether in the Jews themselves in their bodies or in other bodies. It is to animals. And here he gives the punishment. And he gives also the example we just saw here. Someone who causes more injury. Already there's been suffered a terrible injury to the animals' parts over here. So he says, still, there's a liability for doing even more. And this is an important distinction he makes over here. This is also based explicitly on what the sages said, which is someone who sterilizes a female, bein ba'adam, bein bishar minim patur. You'd be whether it's a female person or a female animal, he's also exempt from punishment. But that doesn't mean it's permitted to do so. Hold on, we're just dealing with many people. A few years ago, I was asked regarding the propriety of a neighbor sterilizing his dog. I think it was a female dog. And there's a tshuva out there, I think an opinion attributed to the Taz, based on combining a few leniencies, which I wrote to him that it's I don't think it's accepted by the rest of the poskim that allows for such a thing. There's all sorts of ha-ramot. It seems pretty clear that one of the bases for the heter is that we assume that the reason for not doing this to the animals is because it caused the animal pain. But if you could somehow anesthetize the animal, and it's a female, and it's done by a Gentile, so you can combine all of those leniencies somehow for an actual heter. And the basic premise that somehow the prohibition is the reason for the prohibition, but we know, and we could actually work with this reason, is to avoid the animal's pain. That might not be so clear. The Torah never said such a thing. The Chazal never said such a thing. Often, yes, it's good that we discover the reasons and we try to understand the reasons behind the commandments, but we cannot find a prohibition and say, oh, I know the reason for this prohibition, and therefore I know when the prohibition does not apply, and I will not follow that prohibition in certain circumstances. We don't do that. That was King Solomon's mistake. He looked at a prohibition for which, or a group of prohibitions for which the reasons were given explicitly by the Torah, and he reasoned that the prohibition, the reasons for the prohibitions do not apply to him, and then he violated those prohibitions. Kal v'chomer us, who are we are not as wise as Solomon, and we don't actually know the reasons for these prohibitions. Perhaps it's not to cause the animal pain. For example, I understand why, let's say, when a vet does need to sterilize an animal, neuter or spay the animal, the vet does use proper anesthesia so the animal doesn't feel pain. But anesthesia is not anything new. In the olden days, let's say someone wanted to castrate his bull back in the times of King David for whatever reason. I don't know about you, but even trying to do certain things to bulls the bull can fight back. So how did they castrate bulls back in the olden days? The answer is sometimes they did it while they were very young, but if they had a full-grown bull, how would they do it? The answer, they get the bull drunk, or they restrain the bull. And even if you wanted to try to do such a thing to a fully grown animal or whatever it is, you would have to use some primitive form of anesthesia, usually using alcohol or whatever, poppies, whatever they had. You see, the Egyptians practiced circumcision back in the day, and it seems pretty clear that they were using rudimentary forms of anesthesia for things like that. So the Taz's heter doesn't really get off the ground, and this could be a share from some other time. The next major factor that the Rambam brings up here is something that is comes up with regards to birth control. It says here, "Hamashke ikarim la'adan." Someone who gives someone to drink some sort of potion. Ikarin means an elixir that causes sterilization. I don't know. They've found throughout history that there are certain things a person could drink or an animal could drink, and that would sterilize them without having to resort to surgical methods. or does this to, once again, other animals, not just people, Gedalis arso, and the intention is to sterilize. Hareza asur, that's also prohibited, just like surgical means. Vein lokin love, but once again, one would not be punished with lashes, just like one sterilizes a female of any species, also would not be lashed. It doesn't mean that's allowed. It's like the Rambam's usual rule. It's patur aval asur. The isha muteret lishtodi karin shemisarsinota ad shalot tiled. A woman. Notice he doesn't say a female of any species. Specifically, a human woman can drink some sort of concoction that would sterilize her, so that she'd not give birth. That is technically permitted. See, he says it right here. It might not be smart if a woman wants to have children, but it's permitted. And by the way, this is basically a good source for the use of oral contraception. Normally, I think the Rav has explained when would contraception be permitted. Uh, Usually, we look at, let's say, the man's obligation. First of all, a man has an obligation to produce children up to a certain point, but once he's done that, his duty, perhaps he can then use birth control with his wife. And then, of course, there's permissions explicitly in the Talmud for when women can use birth control, even if the man perhaps still has an obligation to produce children. The woman could use birth control for whatever reason. And here it says specifically birth control that's oral, and not the result of some sort of physical manipulation or destruction would be permitted. And then he gives here what happens if a person causes someone else to become sterilized by tying him up and throwing him into a really cold lake, other ways. And even though one shouldn't be punished for such a thing, according to the Torah, he says it's proper to punish him anyways. The sages should deliver some sort of punishment to this person in order to teach him not to do it. And the last rule here is asur lomar legoy l'saris behema shelanu. It is prohibited for us to tell a Gentile to do castration or sterilization for us. That is, a Jewish person can't say, you know what, I need my cat spayed, so I'll take him to the non-Jewish vet. He'll do it. The non-Jewish vet is allowed to. No, we're not allowed to ask them to do it for us. And if the Gentile did it of his own, so that'd be technically permitted. And if the Jew cheats somehow, if he used some sort of trick to get the Gentile to do this, he sold it specifically to someone, let's say, who he knew would go and then get the animal sterilized and then sell the animal back to him. Uh, we know that's a trick. We know what was really going on here. So we'd punish him and make him sell off that animal. And there we go. That's basically what we need to see for this evening with regards to the prohibition of serus, as it is called. Now, like any other prohibition of the Torah, it makes sense that if, let's say, the animal in question, the man or the animal had a life-threatening condition, and the only solution was to perform this surgery on them, then that would be permissible because in matters of life and death, they override the Torah, most prohibitions of the Torah. And there are unfortunately people who have suffered, let's say, a certain type of cancer that requires either save the person or let them die. So of course we do these types of surgeries in order to save life. That would allow it, but it has to be an actual case of life-threatening danger. One person can't say, for example, oh, for whatever reason he has some sort of psychological trauma. Can you imagine someone who says, I feel like I should be a eunuch for whatever reason, and he really wants that? We don't actually give a permission for that. The next is what I call Yisur Habashabal. It's a lo tilbash gever simlat isha, the prohibition against cross-dressing. Rambam brings the 39th negative commandment is the prohibition against walking around, not literally, walking the ways of the heretics. Well, in this case, I guess it would be more like heathens or infidels. Where they have their women wear clothes of men, and also they wear their types of ornaments, a manly type of thing, like let's say a tie. The only real tachshit in our culture nowadays, men don't wear jewelry, at least let's say Orthodox men here in the land of Israel. And not even everybody's wearing a tie, but let's say a woman wanted to wear a nice masculine tie like this, that would be included in this prohibition. And it says, Lo yakli gever al isha. The garment, kli, by the way, is implement. It's a very general term, like we've seen before. It includes clothing and tools and everything else. Should not be upon a woman. And any woman who does so is punished. Next, the 40th prohibition, which is right after number 39. See, he says this is the 39th, and this is the 40th one, is the same one for men to dress up like women. They shouldn't or decorate themselves with those decorations that are specific to women. And it says, a man should not wear a woman's dress. Pretty straightforward. And once again, a man who violates prohibition should be lashed. So this is interesting. Maimonides then goes and gives an explanation for these. He seeks to find a reason. And over here we have what the Sefer HaMitzvot says, which is slightly different. Also, his count of the prohibitions is slightly different than that of Maimonides. He says, "V'dashem aseh zeh," this act, kolomar, specifically, "Shonashim itkasho b'tachshishtei agvarim, o agvarim b'tachshitei anashim," that men would dress up like women, or when women dress up like men. Yesh shehu na'asa l'orer ha'tivaim lishchitut. Sometimes it's done in order to stimulate the natures toward destruction. He's using very high language here. Kemosha Mefursam Eitzel Amim, like we see among the Gentiles, what they do. Basically, it's I didn't see the actual Arabic. Sometimes it's translated differently. It's basically trying to say that this is a way that they would basically cause perversions. It's saying that they do when they want to, I don't know, get everybody excited about doing something really wrong. And sometimes it involves avodah zarah. He says over here. Sometimes it's a religious thing that they do, and that's also pretty bad. It's either connected to arayot or avodah zarah. And he says here that how is it connected to avodah zarah? He also mentions this in the Moreh Nevuchim, that they felt that someone has to perform these crazy acts, like a man would dress up like a woman, and so forth, and do this, and that would sort of help the crops grow, and or they use it to make amulets. But it was usually involved in some sort of superstitious, paganistic rituals, and that's what they used to do. The Sefer HaMitzvot says over here, "Mishor sher mitzvah leharchik me'emotenu akdosha davar erva." We're supposed to avoid anything that's unseemly, usually involving things that are sexually wrong. And therefore, we have to keep everything that's inappropriate or could lead to this away from us. The sages said this by way of analogy. Our God hates lewdness. That is, he loved us, so he kept us away from this type of lewd stuff. This is something very ugly, very disgusting. It takes the heart of man, takes his mind, pushes it away from the right path and proper thoughts to a place of bad thoughts. Basically, if at least these Rishonim believed that cross-dressing, and usually involves flamboyancy and showing off, is there just to get people to be confused about morality. Morality is the basis of the Torah law, and part of the someone was asking, I guess, certain political movements nowadays, what do they have in common? Because they basically, if you think about it, they contradict each other. So the answer that they all have one thing in common: it's that they deny the basic idea that there is an objective morality. They're basically intent on the negation and destruction of the basics of Torah morality, both for Jew and Gentile. So it makes sense why they would do such a thing. It is without a doubt that if, let's say, men and women dressed exactly the same, this is an expression from the Torah, they would be mixing around way too much. The land would be full of lewdness. And then he mentions also, and another reason is also because of the avodah zarah aspect. There was usually involves avodah zarah, just like Rambam says. And the last issue we have here is false oaths. Once again, we could have found this in the Mishnah, but the Rambam writes it out more clearly. But it's actually quite explicit there. And there's a prohibition to swear falsely, or swear falsely in God's name. That makes it even worse. And he talks about the types of oaths over here. This is right at the beginning of Hilchot Shvuot. And by the way, a joke. This week we had Pentecost. The holiday is called Shavuot, with a kamatz, and that's the plural of Shavua, which means a week. Whereas the feminine form of the word Shavua is with the shava and the silent hey at the end. It's Shivua, an oath. And the plural of an oath, Shivua, is Shivuoth, and with the shava once again under the shin. And they're spelled exactly the same way. And in our English, we both call them Shavuos. So the Masechet Shavuos is not talking about the holiday. It's talking about oaths specifically. That's a usual joke. Ask the children, why is it on Shavuot we learn about Bikurim and not Masechet Shavuot? And the answer, because there's no Masechet Shavuot, it's Shavuot. It's talking about oaths. Okay, good one for the kids. Here he says that there's 4 types of oaths. There's a Shvat between, Shvat Shav. This is a false oath. And Shvat Pikadon, Shvat Idut. We're not going to get into this. This is the oath that, let's say, witnesses take. And he says Shvat Shav. We skipped a few halachot here. This is a false oath. Can be divided into 4. The first is Sheishbal Davar Hadua Shein Ochem. He swears regarding something that's well known that's not true. Ketzad. Let's take an example. Kigon Shenishba al Ha'ish Shehu Isha. He swears that a man, this particular man, is a woman. Valisha Shehi Ish, or that this woman is actually a man. Ve'alamud Shel Shayish Shehu Shel Zahav, or this a marble pillar is actually gold, or vice versa. The Mishnah brings an example that the amud is made of stone, even, or that's gold, or vice versa, gold, and that it's stone. And other types of false oaths. Now, you notice the Gemara here gives, the Chazal gave examples of one person who swears something that's obviously false. I think the example of a stone, or swearing that, what's the example here? Swearing that marble, shayish, is gold is obviously false. So why does he have to give the case of man and women also? Why 2 examples? Why did the sages do that? Not also, you notice the sages gave example of animal, among something in the animal kingdom, the humans, and mineral, gold and stone, or gold and marble. But they didn't give an example of vegetable. The fact that this carrot is not a kohlrabi, or that this palm tree is not grass. And even though, yes, it's kind of hard, you can't mix every single vegetable species, every plant species with each other. They do a lot more mixing on their own, and it's a lot more easier to make mixed breeds of plants than it is of animals or of minerals. You cannot turn gold into stone, or you cannot turn stone to gold, despite what people have been trying for many years. Yes, there's something, atomic transmutation. Eventually, a chunk of uranium, if you give it a few 100 million years, eventually it will turn into stable, inanimate lead, but that takes a much longer time, and you cannot do it, in front of your own eyes. You could take a few atoms. You could use an atom smasher. I guess this is Dr. England's department. There is a way to turn, let's say, certain atoms into other kinds, but you can't do it at women. You can't do it that often, and you can't do it in any quantities that would be noticeable by men. So this is basically impossible. But that's why I believe they gave the animal example and the mineral example, things that cannot be changed. And just to know, that's the assumption. Who would think, the sages at least, were under the impression that, of course, a woman could not become a man and a man could not become a woman. They are not the same thing, even though they're part of the same species of man. They're both called Adam. Within the species Adam, there is a fundamental difference between the two. And of course, we would say that, well, let's say I would take this man and perform the prohibition that we read about up here to this man. Would that make him into a woman? No, that would just make him into, I guess, less of a man, or a blemished man. But there's no way you could positively do something to transform him, transmutate him into something else. At least that's the way the sages understood these things. They basically say, what's the definition? We look at the beginning of also in Hilchot Shut, the Rambam defines all these things. What is a man? What is a woman? At what age are they considered adults and all that? It basically involves something that perhaps is not popular nowadays, but making the basic determination of looking at the child's body when he is born, and that basically tells you what there is. There's some exceptions. There's the androgynous, he looks like a both, and there's the tumtum, which is indeterminate at the point. But it is certain that the sages did not consider that a child that looks like was classically understood as a boy could ever be a girl, in at least in according to the halacha, and vice versa. And that brings us to this next thing. The Rambam says in Hilchot Deot about people who are sort of convinced. Let's say a person takes a false oath. He swears about, let's say, this shayish is zahav, that the marble is gold, or the man is a woman. But the problem is he can't be convinced otherwise. He is certainly positive about that. He says about this cholei haguf. You have people who are sick of the body. They suffer physical maladies. Toamim hamar matok v'matok mar. They taste that which is bitter, it's sweet, and that which should be sweet, they taste as bitter. They're got totally backwards. You can give them some honey, and they think they're eating maror, and you give them some maror, and they think they're eating honey. They got something wrong inside of them. You have people who are ill, a bodily illness, that means an illness in the head. They desire some sort of food that's not even fit for consumption. They want to eat stones. They they wish to eat dirt, or they want to eat charcoal. They hate the good foods. Like bread and meat. See, the Rambam brings that example a few times. Healthy man wants to stay healthy. He should eat bread and meat. He says it also at the end of the positive commandments, Sefer Mitzvot. That's what normal men eat, bread and meat. Hakol lefi rov hacholi. And it all depends on how mentally ill these people are. A person who thinks that the sweet is bitter and the bitter is sweet, or perhaps thinks that something that is not is what is, saying that is not what it is, and they insist on it things, those people have some sort of mental illness. Kach b'nei adam shenafshotehem cholot. That is how you have people who have sick souls. That means they're mentally ill. Mitavim v'avim hadeot haraot. They they desire and they love the bad deot. Deot in this case would be what you and I call in modern English midos, bad behaviors, bad character traits. They hate the good path. And they're lazy about walking that path. They don't want to walk in it. It's very heavy on them. It's too much of a burden. And it all depends on how sick they are. So that he brings a quote from Yeshayahu Navi. These people, they have illnesses. How do you treat someone? Let's say the sages encountered someone who, I don't know, for every reason thought he was a cat. A person thought he was a cat. That's just an example. We could come with other examples. Maybe today we have many other walking examples of people who think they're not what they are. So a person who thought that he was an animal, like a cat. What's the correction for such a person? Mahi takanat cholena fasho. What should these people who are of sick mind do? Yelchu eitzal chachamim. They should go to the wise people. Sheim rofei nefashot. They are the physicians of the souls. V'rapa'u chol yam b'diot. They should heal their sicknesses using proper mindset, proper behaviors. They should teach them how to behave that way until they go on the correct path. People who realize their own shortcomings, their own bad deot, as the Rambam says, and they don't go to the wise people to heal them. Shlomo said about them, King Solomon, musar means chastisement. These fools deride. They deride it. They don't look for things. So there is more to say on these issues, but I think it's very proper that as observant Jews and observant Noahides, we are familiar with these halachic issues, or at least a synopsis of how the sages addressed these issues. And these were classically understood, at least back in those times. I think that it would be wise of us to also familiarize ourselves that we know what to answer if people ask questions. Well, Judaism is old-fashioned; it doesn't get with the times. Yeah, okay, it could be, but at least we should be aware of what our sages believe regarding these issues. Now we're going to check if there are questions. I can't seem to find it here. No, we didn't get a thing here. So unless there's a question here of one of the viewers, we'll call it a night. And we'll see you the next time. Don't forget, like, share, and subscribe. Questions and comments. We close with a prayer that all of mankind join us in recognizing the Creator and His immutable law and serving Him, and that would, God willing, lead to a more peaceful coexistence. Be well.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org. If you are inspired by Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to get involved in Torah Eretz Yisrael activities in your local area, please fill out the relevant form by going to the link which appears on the screen.